The film look is everywhere these days, whether it's in movies, commercials, or even YouTube videos. That nostalgic vintage aesthetic has made a huge comeback. But shooting on actual film isn't always practical. It's expensive, hard to get, and comes with a whole set of challenges. For filmmakers like me based in Singapore where shooting on film isn't exactly the most accessible option, that's where a film emulation plugin like Dehancer comes in really handy. Today we're going to take a look at my color grading process with Dehancer within DaVinci Resolve, and I do want to point out that I've been using the plugin for about a period of 1 month or so now, and I've managed to achieve quite some interesting results. So the purpose of today's video is not so much a review, but more so how I use Dehancer within my color grading process. And I do want to put a small disclaimer out there that Dehancer did reach out to me for this video. However, I am not obliged to say only the good things about Dehancer. So I'll be sharing the pros and cons, and hopefully by the end of the video, provide you guys with some insight on whether you should purchase this film emulation plugin. So one of the reasons why I was so attracted to Dehancer, apart from the fact that I've been seeing it pop out on my YouTube feed for years now, is because they have the Kodak 2383 film print. So if you're a budding colorist like me, I'm sure you've heard of that particular film print before. But for me, why I was so attracted to that is because some of my favorite films were actually printed on the Kodak 2383 film print. So movies like Interstellar, Dunkirk, Joker, and I really wanted to test out Dehancer to see if I can achieve a similar result. But without further ado, let's jump into DaVinci and I can show you guys how I use Dehancer in my color grading process. Okay, right now we are in DaVinci Resolve, and before we jump straight into the node tree structure as well as Dehancer, there are a couple of things that I want to point out in terms of my color management settings. So the timeline color space that I'm working with is DaVinci White Gamut because I want to make full use of the White Gamut source data, and my output color space is Rec 709 Gamma 2.2. It's worth pointing out at this stage that the footage that you are looking at right now is a S-Log3 footage right out from my FX3. So this was shot in Japan 2 years ago in Tokyo. But yeah, let's jump straight into my node tree structure. So my first node, when I always start my color grading process, I always have a color space transform, otherwise known as a input display transform, transforming the S-Log3 footage to DaVinci White Gamut. And for the final node, I'm transforming from DaVinci White Gamut into Rec 709 Gamma 2.2. So some of you may ask, why is Dehancer placed so late into the node tree structure? The reason for that is because we want to have a neutral starting point in terms of balancing the color, managing the exposure, because it would then allow us to be more flexible after we put Dehancer in. And another reason for that is also if we put Dehancer too early into the node tree, the dynamic range of the footage will be stretched a lot. So you could imagine if you want to manipulate the colors afterwards or even the exposure, you are just more restricted in that way. So putting Dehancer towards the end of my node tree structure allows me to have that flexibility to adjust the exposure, balance, as well as the hue and saturation, which is what the fourth node is for. So the reason why I use glow here, even though Dehancer has a bloom function, is because bloom in Dehancer really only affects the highlights or the brighter portions of the videos, creating like a halo effect. Whereas for glow, this is a DaVinci Resolve native plugin or effect. Glow affects not only the highlights, as it also affects the shadows, making it darker. So overall, it makes it look more cinematic, if you will. But okay, let's jump into Dehancer. Okay, so there is honestly quite a lot to go through. I won't be going through everything because honestly that's just too much, but I'll be going through the functions that I feel made my great work and the stuff that I feel could potentially help you achieve that film look, if you will. Alright, so if you're just starting out and you've never seen Dehancer before, honestly it's a plethora of different functions. And my first opinion when I dropped in Dehancer was there was a lot of things that I did not understand. But like most cases, it's a lot of just playing around, dropping the plugin in and then doing the different adjustments and seeing how it affects the footage. But what I really want to talk about is the Kodak 2383 film print that I've been raving so much about. Okay, so for the film print, usually how I like to start my color grades is you can do it however you want, right? But this is just my process and how I like it. Because I have the whole reason why I wanted to test Dehancer was the Kodak 2383 film print. So normally how I start my grading process with Dehancer is to always select the Kodak 2383 film print first. But it's also worth mentioning that it's not the only film print available. You have Cineon Film Log as well as Kodak Endura glossy paper. Okay, but let's just put this in. Within the print menu, there are also different sliders where you can control the color density, tonal contrast, exposure, as well as the target white. I'm not going to go through everything. If you're interested to find out more, you can look on the Dehancer website. It's also worth pointing out now that the reason why I like Dehancer so much is because you have the option to enable the separate functions within the plugin itself. So if you don't want to use halation, you don't have to. And on that note, I did not use the film stocks for this particular grade, and I only used the film print, which is the Kodak 2383, which I've already enabled. But you know, just to go through some of the available film stocks, you have stuff like Fujifilm, you have Kodak obviously, and I have tried some of the Kodak Vision 3 film stocks, and the ones that I really liked was the Kodak Vision 350D, let me just turn that on, as well as the Kodak Ultramax 400. But okay, moving on, Film Developer. Another tool that I don't really use that often, but I do like the Color Boost slider, just to show you guys how it works. Actually, I kind of like how it looks. Let's just leave it on. Film compression is an interesting one. So as you guys may know, analog film, usually a lot of the highlights are very compressed. So you have the option to you know, turn this on, and there's even the slider to select the white point. It's not as obvious in this image, but just pay attention to this light here. If I slide the white point, I can just make it more compressed so it's not as blown, so as to achieve a closer cinematic film look. But there's also all the different options like impact, tonal range, as well as color density. Expand is also another interesting one. So I'm not sure if I mentioned before, but when I first dropped in the Kodak 2383 film print, I felt like it was too contrasty, and the expand menu was particularly useful because I get to decide how crushed I want the blacks are, or how blown I want the highlights are, as well as how compressed they can be. So this is a interesting function, a useful function. If you don't want to go back to the exposure node, you can do it within Dehancer itself. And for me, I do like my blacks crushed, but in the case of the Kodak 2383 film print within Dehancer, I always felt like it was a little bit too contrasty. So more often than not, I would always slide the black point to just brighten some of these shadows a little bit. Color hit is an interesting one which I don't usually use, but if you do want to make minor adjustments, like for example in this image, without it turned on, I felt like the shadows, even though I balanced it to make it a little bit more cool in the shadows, I did feel like I wanted it to be a little bit more cold or more blue, and that's when I went ahead to just do a little bit of the slider adjustments. I can show you guys the differences it makes. So stuff like this, magenta and green, pretty self-explanatory. Also, the shadow tones is a function that was particularly interesting for me. So I guess like a lot of the process when I was using Dehancer was just messing around with the sliders. To be fair, I did not know all the different functions, and even now testing it for a month, it's tough to remember every single thing. So more often than not, I would just jump straight in, you know, try the different functions and try to always go further than I want, and then just tone it back down to achieve the look that I prefer. Film grain, pretty self-explanatory as well. Turning it on, you can select all the different formats of film. You can even have 8mm at the different ISOs, but I prefer to have it at 35mm ISO 500, and you can even adjust the amount of grain that you want, the strength basically. But like I mentioned, if you prefer not to turn it on, you can also disable it. Okay, let's have a look at halation. So halation, if you're not familiar, it is basically what I mentioned before, creating that halo. Let me just switch off the film grain so it's a little bit more obvious. Have a look at the bright spots of the image. Turning it on and off. Notice how there's like this little halo here, and the edges of the light, it has this like redness to it. And this is one of the film characteristics that I felt really made it look like it was shot on film. So it's pretty cool. Same thing, you can choose all the different film formats. You have 8mm Super 8, you have 65mm, but for me I tend to just stick to 35, Super 35. And you can even choose the amount that you want to amplify it. One thing I did notice about the halation is when I turn it on, it feels like, let me just reset everything back to its stock setting. But more often than not, I realized that the halation tends to affect the overall image, like everywhere in the image and not only the highlights, which may be annoying to some people, but I just wanted to point it out. For some reason, the mask mode also doesn't really show me. I would imagine that it would show me the areas that it's affecting, even though it seems like it's affecting majority of the image, but it's not showing up in the mask mode. I don't know why that is. But I guess in shots like this one where it's a lot darker, it's more obvious. Let me check. Yeah, the mask mode doesn't work here too. And then we have bloom, which I mentioned the reason why I use glow and bloom concurrently is because like glow affects the shadows. But let me show you guys how it looks like with bloom. So notice how there's a slight glow around the brighter highlight spots, so particularly the bulbs. And same thing with halation and film grain. You can even go through the different film formats. You have Super 8, you have like all the different ones. And you can choose the strength of it. So just exaggerating it for the purpose of this video. This is what it looks like at 50%. This is what it looks like at 100%. Let's just go ahead to adjust it. Maybe something like this. No, that's way too much. Okay, let's just leave it here. Let's see if the mask mode works. Yeah, for some reason, it does not work here too. Not sure why that is. Moving on to the other menus, this is where I think it gets a little bit more stylistic. You have the option to use it if you want. More often than not, I tend not to use anything after bloom. But film damage, basically, if I play through this video, I'm not sure if you can see, but there's like there's scratches on the footage. Let me see if there's another option. Okay, Super 8 should be quite obvious. But yeah, so I guess typically if you didn't have Dehancer, you would throw in a film overlay, which also works fine, but since Dehancer has it, why not, right? But yeah, so this is basically what film damage does. So for film breath, the effect is the accidental change in exposure as well as the color and contrast. I'll just switch it on just to show you guys. Let me put it on Super 8 so it's more obvious. So notice how the color slightly changes from green to magenta. Not something that I'm particularly fond of as well, but also nice to have. Let's just turn that off. For gate weave, I've never shot on actual film before, but according to my research, gate width is very common when you're shooting on actual film cameras. It's basically that jitter that you're seeing now. It's already on max. Yeah, so that jittering on the footage, also something that I'm not particularly fond of and I don't really use it. And then we have overscan, which I found it to be quite interesting. So rather than just putting an overlay, as I would imagine a lot of people do when they're looking for that film overscan look, but you have so many options to choose from. You have all the different, even widescreen 5mm with the 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio. Pretty interesting, pretty cool. Vignette, I'm sure most of you already know, pretty straightforward. I do tend to use Vignette a little bit, not as much as the other ones, but the mask mode actually works on this, so that's great. But you can even change the different aspect ratios, which I found it to be quite cool. and obviously the exposure making the sides of the footage look darker as well as the size. And I guess the following functions, you can even have like false color just to check your exposure. Clipping indication, which I think would be quite useful, but for me most of the time I usually rely on my scopes to make sure nothing is clipped, so I have not used this function before. Output, I'm guessing it would just be the opacity of the whole Dehancer settings, so quite cool, interesting to have. LUT generator, as its name suggests, I guess after you have like a particular setting that you like, you can export it as a LUT. So if you're someone that's shooting on a monitor where you can input your own LUTs in, this may come in handy, even though I have never tried this function before. And I guess that is about all the functions that are within Dehancer. So like I mentioned, there's honestly a lot to go through. I just basically skimmed the surface of it, and I'm still in the midst of trying to experiment to see what works and what doesn't. But generally, I guess you guys have a gist of how Dehancer works, and I have been quite pleased with the results. So comparing to using the Kodak 2383 film print within DaVinci Resolve, I wouldn't say that it's impossible to reach the same results, but it is worth mentioning that with the Dehancer plugin, it's a lot more straightforward, it's a lot more flexibility, and honestly, working with a LUT is basically just a LUT, right? It's just something that you slap on. So I would say that is one of the main reasons why I feel Dehancer is a better option rather than using the Kodak 2383 LUT within DaVinci Resolve. Okay, let's have a look at Dehancer turned off and Dehancer turned on. So definitely it does look more filmic in my opinion. Whether or not it is an accurate representation of the Kodak 2383 film print, because I've never shot on any film stock before, except for the Kodak Portra 400 800 back in the day. I am not in the position to give you an accurate answer of whether the Dehancer film emulation is accurate, but I will mention that the results that I've got is very nice in my opinion, and I do like it. I love how there's so many different options, and oh, I wanted to also say that within the stock options like the film grain, there's even an option to select your own custom film grain. So there's so many different things you can do, even for halation as well. So in that regard, I guess it's also a good time to mention the pros of what I feel Dehancer is maybe good for you. Number one, it's very beginner friendly. Even though there's so many different options where you can choose from, right? I would say if you are a complete beginner, you can go through all the different functions, and the learning curve is practically, there's no learning curve. It's more of just dropping the plugin in, going through the different film stocks, going through the different film prints, sliding the sliders around. Most of the functions are quite straightforward, like I mentioned, bloom, halation, grain. So in that regard, I think it's very beginner friendly. Secondly, there's so many options. To some people, they may feel like it's a con, but to me, I would rather have the many options, even though I don't use them all the time, compared to not having as many options. So that's pro number two. Number three, the output of the grade. I would say I have had very minimal experience with other film emulation plugins. In fact, Dehancer is the first film emulation plugin that I've tested, but the way that Dehancer has managed to control the colors, nothing is too pushed, nothing is breaking apart, everything is well within the scopes and the dynamic range. So I would say Dehancer did a pretty good job in terms of maintaining the dynamic range as well as the color output. Let's talk about the first con. Dehancer is a very processor intensive plugin. So just for context, I am using a M4 Max chip. I believe my specs for this Mac are 36 GB of RAM. So pretty decent. But in terms of playback, if I turn on film grain, which I feel is one of the effects that actually requires a lot of processing power, I am getting a playback of around 23 frames, which is pretty decent. So this footage was shot on 50 frames per second, and I believe I slowed it down to half, which would equate to 25 frames per second. So in terms of the playback, I'm getting pretty close to what is to be expected. But I will caution you to potentially get a free trial or check your specs to see if it is able to withstand the processing power that is required by Dehancer, because I would imagine it would get pretty annoying if you were to make any slider adjustments and you can't even get a regular playback speed or anything close to the regular playback speed. So that's number one. The second con, which I feel is the biggest con as to why a lot of people might not want to purchase Dehancer, is because of the cost. So a lifetime license costs you 449 USD, which translates to 600 Singapore dollars. One of the reasons, well, this is one of the reasons why I've been holding back on purchasing Dehancer for the longest time, even though I've been seeing it pop up on my YouTube feed for years, is because it's very hard for me to justify a film emulation plugin which I feel is tied to a trend. I think most of us know it's been around for, well, the actual film has been around for the longest time, but being film emulation and wanting that film look on your color grade, I would say the trend is still relatively recent. Whether or not it will last a lifetime or whether or not it will last till next year is a question that I feel nobody can answer. So honestly, for me, that was what was holding me back. In my opinion, I feel like if you are a hobbyist colorist, not exactly the best place to spend your money, but you know, if you have 449 USD lying around, by all means purchase it. But I feel like for the price tag, it only makes sense if you are doing it as a profession, be it if you're a DP, a colorist, or you know, if you make money off of the plugin. But if not, like I mentioned, it's quite tough to justify. And honestly, apart from that, I would say if we strip away the price tag, Dehancer is an awesome plugin. I had a lot of fun with it, and I believe I'll be continuing having a lot more fun with it. I do want to mention that Dehancer also has an iPhone app, so if you don't want to spend 600 Singapore dollars or 449 USD on the plugin, on DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro, you have the option to try it on your iPhone, even though it is still a paid app. But I would say in terms of functionality and you know, all the different options, you have exactly the same things as what I just showed you, and it behaves very, very similarly to that. Number one downside I have with the app though is that you can only grade one clip at a time. So if you're planning to do your edits in CapCut, exporting it and then grading it into Dehancer on the app, you do have to grade them individually, which I feel is going to be very, very annoying. So in terms of the app, how I used it so far, I've just been throwing on simple grades on stories and uploading it to Instagram. But I wouldn't see it as a tool that you can use to batch edit like many clips, especially if they're all different scenes, even though you can save the presets. But yeah, same as always, if you have any questions relating to whatever that I just showed you, leave them in the comments. I'll try my best to answer them. And as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this Ryan Mamba's perspective, and I'll see you guys in the next one.